My name is Guido Weiss, and I am a Democratic candidate for Florida's 21st Congressional District.
Hi, this is Warren Redlick. I'm here with, I should have asked you before we went live, Guido Weiss?
Yes, Warren, Guido Weiss.
Okay, this is Guido Weiss. Guido is in a Democratic primary with Lois Frankel, who is the sitting member of the House covering Palm Beach County. Is there any part of the district that's outside Palm Beach County?
No, there's not, Warren. We're the only congressional district that's totally within Palm Beach County. There's 4, however, that are part of Palm Beach County, but we're the only one totally within. When
we talked earlier, you said something that made me think about this. Do you have experience in Congress you worked there or lobbyist or something?
Absolutely. So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of give a little introduction to that as well. So Guido Weiss, my name is Guido Weiss. I'm from Wellington, Florida. And the last 4 years, I worked in Congress for 2 Democratic members and with multiple committees, with the House Armed Services Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and for Congressman Brad Sherman from California, and then Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii. And my focus...
You know I'm a Tulsi Gabbard fan. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wonderful. Okay. I was her legislative director.
Okay.
And I worked on everything from national security policy, indigenous rights, environmental policy, veterans health care, and everything in between, because it was an excellent opportunity. I'm also a Navy intelligence officer.
Okay. Are you active duty, reserve? What's
reserve?
Okay.
I'm a reservist, 5 years in. I was enlisted before as an operations specialist, so radar communications and strategic communications, and then I commissioned last year, actually. The Congresswoman Tulsi was my commissioning officer.
The first thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is the hot issue. Okay, this is the issue of the day. Is Black Lives Matter. It's criminal justice reform. Before I get into specific questions, what's your take on what's going on with criminal justice, Black Lives Matter, all that?
So one thing I can just bring here from my days working in Congress was you do have a lot of forces in our country, and this is one of the biggest things I'm trying to work towards, is getting corporate money outside of politics. So you have right now private prison industry that does lobby every single level of government, from local, state, and federal, for longer mandatory minimum sentences, for harsher penalties on various issues. I think that, combined with a lot of, we have a black population that went from slavery to segregation to modern day to our society we're in today, and there still is a lot of race issues going on. It's very, very clear that there's still racism in this country, and that, in combination with the corporate interests, has led to a significant, higher population percentage of black people being in prison and also being pulled over, and all the stories you see all over the news. I've been at many events recently, and they're very real to people that have been in those situations. So I'm very supportive of the peaceful protests that are going on right now. I think it's a big learning opportunity for our entire society. I definitely don't condone anything that's not peaceful, but right now we're seeing politics react. We're seeing state, local, and federal government start to look into private prison industry, look into other types of reforms that are going to change the situation for the people on the ground in this country.
Okay, so you're running against Lois Frankel, and you brought up the private prison industry, lobbying members of Congress. Has she received money from, I think Geo Group is in Boca Raton, right?
So Geo Group's in Boca Raton. Lois Frankel has personally invested in the private industry and got called out when people noticed and said it wasn't it was a financial advisor who did it.
It's always somebody else's fault.
It's always somebody else's fault. And then she also invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in fossil fuel for a year or two, for a few years actually, and then acted as if, I didn't know. Once she got called out on it, she stopped investing. There's a lot of politicians that don't invest in private prison and don't invest in fossil fuels because those stocks happen to have good dividends and other types of returns. She has been a part of that. I can say, that's from her investment side, because every member of Congress has to say, where have I invested and where am I taking money from? And that's all public record. She has taken money from payday lenders, which is, payday lenders disproportionately, there's a lot of data showing, disproportionately influence low-income communities. And within those communities, frequently it's black and brown people that get stuck in cycles and cycles of debt from those institutions. She's been in cahoots with those countries from her time, going from mayor to Congress.
Can you talk about, there's a couple of bills that are in Congress, or have been talked about in Congress right now. One is to end qualified immunity. I think that was Justin Amash, who's a member of the House. And Rand Paul supports banning no-knock raids. What is your take on those two proposals, and what other... Let's talk about those two first, then we'll talk about some other ideas.
Yeah. So I'd have to look into the bill from Amash's on qualified immunity, honestly, to give a good answer on that. Can you say the other one?
Well, let's just talk about qualified immunity first. Are you familiar with what it is?
So I have to look at the definition in front of me, honestly.
Okay. So really simple. If I'm doing my job and I harm someone as a private sector employee, then I'm either negligent or I'm not negligent, and I'm liable, and my company is liable for my actions if I'm negligent or I'm not negligent. If a government employee, not just police, if a government employee harms someone under federal law, there's something called qualified immunity. There's no liability unless they violated a clearly established constitutional right. Because I'm talking about federal.
Yep.
And it applies in a lot of state court cases as well. There's these immunities. So basically it's saying government is privileged. It's kind of like sovereign immunity, right? Government is privileged, and government can do wrong and not be held accountable, where private sector individuals are held accountable. And I personally, even though I don't like qualified immunity, I don't think that's really a big issue in what's going on, but I just wanted to get your take on that because that's a hot issue right now.
I think in general we're seeing a lot of... It's only more recently where you're seeing a lot of people, and it's, like you said, it's not necessarily at the federal level. A lot of these police departments are at the local level. There are less federal police officers that have been...
No, but they get sued federally. They get sued for violating the person's constitutional rights.
Yep.
And then they're protected by qualified immunity. And then the related charges of, battery or whatever they're accused of, they're protected by qualified immunity. So it's very, very hard to sue police officers and other government officials when they violate people's rights. Harder than it is to sue private sector companies, individuals. Do you think government should be privileged like that?
I think that individuals who are clearly harming other individuals and violating their rights need to be held accountable. 100%. Again, this is something that I want to look into a lot deeper before saying this is exactly what we need to do. But in general, we've seen members of law enforcement and other aspects of society that have clearly infringed on people's rights get away with suspensions or early retirement and things like that. That to me is unacceptable. And I think right now you're seeing, as you saw in Atlanta, police officers come under charges and under criminal penalty in a way that a few years back we saw similar circumstances and they were let go or suspended. I think that our justice system is finally responding to what people have been talking about for years in terms of people who are in positions of power getting off scot-free because they said they made a mistake.
Okay, the other issue is Rand Paul's bill to ban, I think it was Rand Paul's bill, to ban no-knock raids. So what happened with Breonna Taylor was police had a tip, or I think they even had the wrong address, or they went to the wrong house, but they burst into her home, shot her and killed her. Her boyfriend shot and injured a cop on the way, in response. This has been a common thing in the drug war is no-knock raids. What do you think about no-knock raids?
Yeah, I think that a no-knock raid, especially what you saw with Breonna Taylor, is incredibly dangerous to our society. I mean, having the ability to do something like that and not have and get into a situation where somebody's killed, right, and almost instantly from what I read about Breonna Taylor, it was very, very quick, and there was really no opportunity for there to be, oh, this is a mistake,
right.
And we can't have a no-knock raid where somebody has the situation. And I saw the police department locally in that case ban no-knock raids.
Yes.
We can't have a situation where if somebody comes into your house, you go into self-defense mode.
Yes.
And if they know where the person is already, they can make sure that person doesn't go out without seeing there are other ways to interact with somebody who you have a warrant for than bursting into the house without
right. So the theory is that if they know the police are coming, they will destroy evidence. If you're pursuing a drug raid,
Yep.
it's because you think they have drugs inside, and if they think the police are outside, they'll flush the drugs down the toilet, or they'll
Yep.
throw it out the back window, or whatever it is that they might do, or they'll burn it. It should be obvious if you don't know me already. I think I'm opposed to the entire drug war. So I just legalize all
Yep.
drugs. That's a longer conversation. I won't put you on the spot on that one, but so. There's been a lot of other talk about other things. Rather than talking about qualified immunity or, we have Black Lives Matter. I mean, I hate this question, but I'm going to ask the standard question. Do you support Black Lives Matter?
Definitely. I've been to many Black Lives Matter protests, and the organizers of all of them have interacted with me professionally. Now, you have a lot of, and it's been, everyone I've been to so far in Florida has been peaceful for the right reasons, professional, etc. You do have some out there saying that there are people on the right now saying that this movement is something that we should be feared. I don't believe that. I've been interacting with them, many hours as a community organizer in engaging with the community, and I've seen positive across the board. And I really enjoyed getting to know a lot of the organizers. One thing I can say about the movement right now is it's not a centrally organized movement. This is really grassroots across the country. So you have the person who's doing something in one other part of the country might not be the same person who's doing something in Florida, and there isn't necessarily a centralized system or one specific leader. And I think that, when I was out with the Black Lives Matter individuals in West Palm Beach, they were saying, everybody be home by 9, there's a curfew. There have been people trying to hijack what we're pushing for in combating racism in our country, and I don't want anybody to get caught up in that in this community. I saw that in Wellington, I saw that in Lake Worth, I saw that in West Palm Beach. I know in West Boca and Parkland there's a protest this weekend, but all of my experience has been positive with the movement so far.
Yeah, I covered 2 protests in West Boca, one at Butts Road by Town Center Mall and one at Glades and 441, and they were both peaceful. The one at Butts Road was a little more rambunctious, but still, I wouldn't call it anything but peaceful. But, you say it's grassroots and everything. I see some commonalities that seem to be directed from a center, and there is a Black Lives Matter website, and it seems like one of the most popular slogans out of Black Lives Matter is defund the police. What do you think about the phrase defund the police?
Yep. I don't think we should be advocating for defunding the police. I think we should be advocating for reform of our system, especially when it comes to police salaries and things like that. Now, should police departments look like militias? I don't think so. I don't think that. I think it's a bad phrase, honestly. It sends the wrong message. We shouldn't have police departments that look like militias at the second they think something's going to happen, all of a sudden turn into what could be a military unit in another country. I don't think that's the right thing in our society as well. I think that there's a lot of police officers, and many of them come from minority communities that are honest, hardworking, contributing members to our society, that their salaries should be, they're working to protect us day and night. And when you have a fall, or when there's domestic violence, or when there's whatever, you need to be able to call somebody. That doesn't mean we don't need very significant criminal justice reform across the spectrum, and more make significant police changing reforms and societal reforms. I totally agree with that. But yeah,
okay.
I think the catchphrase has gone. I think that the phrase "defund the police," and I've heard this from many local leaders, even within the Black community. I said, no, that's not what we're not necessarily fighting for. Defunding the police, we're fighting against racism.
Okay, and just to be clear, the New York Times featured an op-ed that said "abolish the police." That defund the police means abolish the police. So it's not like it's some left-wing nut jobs who are saying this. It's on the Black Lives Matter website, which everybody says they support Black Lives Matter, and it's in the New York Times. New York Times is center left usually.
So they've also I think they published an op-ed by Muammar Gaddafi at one point too. They
published an editorial by, I think, like Tom Cotton, and they had to fire half the editorial staff over that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I am working with the Black Lives Matter movement locally to make sure those voices are heard. We have a congresswoman right now, Frankel, who's the typical Democratic incumbent who's corporate, who shows up on MLK Day and gives a little speech and puts out a statement, but is not with the community, trying to help every community in the district from day-to-day basis, all out, every single time they're in the district. That to me is very problematic. We need to address that from our representation.
Okay. But let me put you on the spot, though. You say you support criminal justice reforms. Give me an example of, and this is every protest I went to for West Poconos, I would ask this question. Give me an example of something you would change in policing that would make things better.
So, I mean, there's the reasons why people are being arrested. That's part of the, what we need to look into. So when it comes to decriminalization or even legalization of marijuana, you have people who have been in jail for a long time for marijuana, having an ounce of marijuana on them, when all the data shows that is not something that is harmful to society, going to hurt society. Alcohol is far worse. It's not a drug that has been known to increase violence. So that's one example of criminal justice reform that deals with the war on drugs. There's also issues with cash bail, restricting fines and fees, levied on people before adjudication. In Florida, we had the allowing.
Okay, so let me just stop you there, because I agree with you about cash bail, but I don't think it's relevant to the problem of cops shooting black people. And I would just say, when you mentioned militarization, I don't like police militarization either, but George Floyd was killed with a knee. I have yet to see a case where a black man was killed with an automatic weapon. And you said you're a reservist. You've probably fired an automatic rifle.
Yes.
An M4 or something like that.
Yes.
I'm talking about the Breonna Taylor encounter, the Philando Castile encounter, the George Floyd encounter, the Michael Brown encounter. These situations that are popping up, can you give me a reform? And the legalizing marijuana one, I'm on board with you 100%. I don't think you're going far enough. I would legalize them all. But I legalize cocaine, heroin, LSD, whatever. I don't expect you to go there. But I'm talking about, can you give me a specific reform that you would advocate that would have protected George Floyd, would have protected Breonna Taylor? That's what I'm asking about. Cash bail doesn't have anything to do with
it. There's no chokeholds. You can have a chokehold ban. When I was in the Navy, in the Navy as a security force member, I was taught never to do what they did to George Floyd. And it was in my training. I was a military police in the Navy. That was in my training. Do not ever do that. You can't put your knee on someone's neck. You can't even put them on the ground with handcuffs behind their back and apply pressure. That is restricting. There's cameras. There's requirements for police officers to have cameras. Now, there's been a lot of data out there showing when people are on film and they're dealing with anybody, it doesn't matter their color, they deal with them in a much different way than when they're off camera and they know that there's no penalty for what I'm going to do. And it's not, but when they're on camera, in many of these cases, technology has been the proliferator of us understanding what's going on. Phone cameras, body cameras, car cameras, that's how we catch all this stuff. In the 90s, you had a few cases where it was, convenience stores cameras or something in the parking lot, but now we have cameras everywhere. So I think that those are a couple proposals that are certainly, and you mentioned no knock, there's a lot of proposals out there that are trying to get at some of the problems we face. My one fear is I want to get at some of the deeper issues as well with overall system reform. I think there's a lot of money in this type of behavior, in keeping people in prison. There's a lot of money in it. I want to change our campaign finance reform system. I want people to vote in August and November to get out, to put in, we have a judge election coming up, put in judges with lawyers that have good records, put in candidates who have good records, and take out the bad ones.
Okay. So let's turn to another topic. I think it's the first issue on your campaign website, COVID-19. I don't know that I have a specific question about COVID-19, but what's your take on COVID-19, how we're handling it as a country, how we're handling it as a state?
Yeah. So there was a report put out today that talked about Florida being the new potential flash zone of the entire country. So in that sense, Anthony Fauci, when he said we could lose 150,000 lives in our country a few months ago, And people were saying that's why would you ever say that? There was people on, serious commentators saying that was an irresponsible thing to say. It's causing more harm than good. But now we're a few months later and we're at 115,000 lives taken from COVID-19. We're over 2 million people in this country infected. I think we've done a terrible job, honestly. You have countries like Japan who have significantly less deaths and cases, but stronger national infrastructures for dealing with stuff like this. Florida alone, you're over 73,000 cases. We're opening up right now, and there doesn't seem to be any desire. Actually, we also had today ICUs in Palm Beach County overbooked. We're starting to lose even beds in our ICUs. So we can't go around and act as if this is something that's no longer happening. And in this district, we have, as you mentioned before, a significant population over 65 that is at increased risk for it. So let me just, in terms of how we need to really address this, contact tracing is a big one. There are some concerns that need to be answered with contact tracing, but there's also a significant lack in investment in just the practice as a whole. We used it for polio; it was successful. We need to go back to that and put actual resources in it.
What do you think about people attending large public gatherings?
Oh, I think that if there is anybody in a large public gathering, there needs to be PPE involved. As we've seen, the country is not. The states aren't going back to full lockdown. The federal government's even encouraging large public gatherings. Not encouraging, sorry, I won't say encouraging, but they're commenting. The Trump administration is commenting on large public gatherings. If there is somebody in a large public gathering, one, especially indoors, I don't think we should be doing it whatsoever. I've seen some things outdoors. That I've seen people in masks downtown, but even downtown in Delray and West Palm Beach right now, where there are restaurants open, I've seen restaurants filled with people. Yeah, the table might be 12 inches further from each other they were on each direction, or 2 feet further, but tables filled with people. And if you look at the CDC and what they're saying about being close to somebody and getting contact, it takes 5 minutes to have a significant exposure of contact, and people are from me to the wall to each other. I think that we are in for, unfortunately, and I don't even think, I know, just based off of the data we're seeing and the growing numbers in Palm Beach County, we're unfortunately heading in that direction.
Well, are some public gatherings privileged? Like you said, you went to, and I went to, Black Lives Matter protests, where large numbers of people, and when you mentioned PPE, my experience is an awful lot of people aren't using them correctly anyway. I see people with the mask and it's not covering their nose. I see people taking them off. And they're certainly not observing social distancing at any of these rallies that I've been to. They start off with 6 feet and then everybody's all together in a big group. So you participated in, sounds like 4 of them. Presumably that's not good for the spread of the virus, but you were participating. How do you justify that?
So I'll say one thing about the ones that I went to. The people using PPE, it was outdoors. And the people were all using PPE, and that was even one thing that the Black Lives Matter movement was encouraging when they were there. A lot of people are starting to go to online type rallies, which I've seen increasing in scope and number. But it was a stark contrast to see at the restaurants nobody's got PPE on, and at the coffee shops nobody has PPE on.
Well, you're not supposed to wear it at the table.
Yeah, no, not at the table, but there's big crowds outside of it. And inside of it, and in stores, you see a lot of people without PPE, and all of a sudden, the stores have taken down the requirements, not all of them, but many of them, to wear a mask inside the store. So I think that's what I would want to address first. So far, from what I've seen at the protests, they've done a better job in general about wearing PPE. And I was looking at the photos, and I was pretty amazed to see some of them and keeping some type of distance. One of them that I saw, people were keeping very significant distance to try to be aware of those regulations of the 6 feet and things like that. I mean, the line, which would have been a march that was like 100 yards, ended up being like 400 or 500 yards.
Okay, so I don't know how much you know about me, but it seems like you and I are, and I'm probably extreme compared to most people, but you and I are on opposite sides of this issue. I see that when you talk about seniors, I'm with you 100%. We need to protect our seniors I think in some ways we're not doing enough to protect our seniors because we're distracted by other things. But my opinion, and I can tell you a lot of my friends think I'm nuts when I say this, is if you're under age 60 and generally healthy, the flu is more dangerous to you than COVID-19. If you're under 30, you're more likely to be killed by a lightning bolt than you are by COVID-19. And yet we shut down our schools, and we shut down all these jobs, and we shut down all these businesses, and it's going to have a massive impact on federal revenue and the federal budget. It's going to have a massive impact on state and local budgets. How do you see the balance going here? You can tell where I am. And again, my audience may not agree with me, especially in West Boca. But how do you balance that problem that if you shut down everything, you're destroying the economy?
So I think that, just kind of going back to what you mentioned before, you do have, I've seen here people who I've known who have been below 65 who have died and from COVID-19. There have been 100, as I mentioned before, 100.
Let's be clear. People have died in car accidents. People have died from a variety of causes. The fact that somebody who died, and when you say I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in here, but when you say somebody who died of COVID, you weren't in the hospital where the diagnosis was made. And again, like I said, people don't necessarily agree with me, but my experience is a lot of these cases where somebody young allegedly dies of COVID, you look at the actual cause of death, and it's not respiratory. I just saw one the other day where it was a kidney failure. Well, COVID doesn't cause kidney failure. COVID causes respiratory failure. So I think a lot of these are overstated. And of course, there's going to be somebody who dies who's under 65. But to me, it's dramatically overstated. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just want to get back to the balancing question.
Sure. So just, with all due respect, Warren, we mentioned earlier 36,000 people died in 2019 of car deaths. We're talking about automated vehicles. Right now, we're at 115,000 in about a quarter of a year, about half a year. And if that goes
just to be clear, I don't buy that number, but I understand, that is a common number that's used.
So I mean, I'm just going off of the government reporting. So if that's that. Car crashes are one of the are a significant cause of mortality in the United States, and we're talking triple, quadruple, potentially 8 times that number by the end of the year. For me, it's just I have a respectful disagreement in opinion with you, where I think that this is this is to me something that is worth taking an economic hit for protection of the greater good. It's going to be a rough year. A lot of people who are developing in their lives in 2020 are going to have a harsh, 17 or 18 or whatever. These young people are going to grow up in a time where our high school graduates, you name. But I think a lot of this, again, I don't want to see 200,000 people dead in our country from it. And you might, again, with all due respect, we might disagree on the numbers and where they're coming from. But for me, that's what I believe.
But what about? Look, you've got. You're imposing social isolation. You're taking people away from their jobs. You're doing things that are going to increase the suicide rate. You're doing things that keep people. I just saw a story today about somebody who just got to the hospital in time. He was hesitating to go. He had a heart attack, and wasn't going to the hospital because he was afraid of COVID. So there's a lot of deaths that are being. It's not just the economy. It's not everybody goes, oh, it's just money. Well, people not having money. Sometimes that causes them to commit suicide. People being terrified of this virus because of exaggerations. I'm sorry, it's my take that there's a hysteria here that's being pushed by government and the media that's causing deaths in other ways. And now you look at federal and state budgets. I'm just trying to get you to balance. Yes, and I'm not disputing that it's real. Okay, it is killing people, particularly old people. I absolutely agree with that, especially when certain governors ordered nursing homes to take them as residents, to take COVID patients as residents. That's a big chunk of the number. But there's still a consequence here that we have a massive increase in federal spending. We're going to have a massive reduction in federal revenue. We're going to see the same things at the state and local level. As a congressman, you're going to have to deal with budgetary issues that are going to come out of this. How do you address that?
Look, in terms of right now, we're over 115, 120% national debt to GDP ratio. That's been an issue we've had to address for a long time. There was this notion from Republicans and Democrats back and forth that blame each other for the cause of the national debt. Your tax cuts caused my national debt and military spending. Your domestic spending causes our national, whatever it is. This goes back and forth. But what we know for sure is that the national debt ballooned under the Trump administration even before COVID was a thought in anybody's mind.
And it ballooned under the Bush administration, and it ballooned under the Reagan administration,
and
too.
It started decreasing under the Obama administration. So
no, it did not. The debt did not decrease. The deficit, deficit decreased.
Our deficit started decreasing under, which is a step in the right direction under the Obama administration. Now, in terms of that's something that we're going to have to deal with, absolutely. But right now, we're kind of in this situation where the country is being forced to grip with what's going on at the moment. And the concern right now, ahead of all of this stuff, is saving people's lives. And that's just that's where our Congress is. That's where our government is. That's where the most of the policymakers are in terms of what to address first.
But if you collapse the economy, more people die. And I feel like, no, I'm not picking on you personally. I mean, I just feel like I want to scream at the top of my lungs at everyone in Congress and the White House, too, because it was despite the differences back and forth, most of this has been bipartisan. And Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump were both bragging about how the CARES Act was bipartisan. And I want to scream at the top of my lungs, you guys are destroying the economy. And millions, not hundreds of thousands of people, this could kill millions of people. The UN is talking about 200 million people dying of starvation because of the economic crisis. And I feel like no one is talking about the economic consequences and everybody just, oh, you just care about money. No, I care about money because money means lives.
So we've seen in our economy also, we've seen a major adaptation. Now we're at, in our economy, 14% unemployment. I have to double check the number because it's been fluctuating significantly. There have been a lot of countries around, and especially in Europe and other places, where that's the norm. Where we are right now.
That's not a good norm. That's not something to aim for.
That's in no way what I'm aiming for or would ever aim for. What I'm saying is as we continue to progress, the economy has also adapted in many ways. The amount of people working from home has adapted in many ways. The amount of automations and conversations like this have adapted in many ways. So our economy is adapting to what is the norm in our society at the moment. I can't say with any conviction that we shouldn't be taking serious precautions right now. I think that the government has. Sorry, my dogs are barking right now. In case you hear something. One. Yeah, but there is a balance right now. Like they have opened up to some extent. At the same time, implementing stricter measures across the board in terms of PPE. So I do think you see an effort on the government's behalf to keep the economy moving, as well as protect human lives. We still have a lot of work to do. Nothing about this, in no way, shape, or form, has been a perfect response in any way. And you saw a lot of bailout. You saw part of that bailout was very corporate and gave unregulated money to a lot of companies.
Yes.
Nothing about this is perfect.
And that was bipartisan.
And yeah, look, trust me, I'm just as critical as the Democratic Party in terms of my whole thing with the Democratic Party is I'm going against a Democrat who takes 95% of her money from companies or large donors. And when it comes down to fighting for issues for this community, and we're talking, it's bragging about that last bill, when in my view, it was far from imperfect.
Okay, so
it was far from perfect.
I want to talk about one more thing that's a more national. I want to talk about local issues shortly. I want to talk about one more thing that you'll probably like talking about, and we're probably going to agree on to some extent. It's the reason I love Tulsi Gabbard. I'm concerned about federal budget, and one of the biggest items in the federal budget is our foreign policy, and I mean our military foreign policy of having troops in. I'm going to ask you if you know the answer. How many countries do we have troops in?
Oh, it is a lot. I don't know the exact number, but I mean I can tell you almost every country in the Middle East. We have troops in a lot of the countries in Europe. We've got bases all over around Latin America and Asia, and including in some in Africa. So it's dozens and dozens. Now there's one assessment that says 63, I believe.
The number I saw was 177. That's from I think Business Insider, and that includes you got five soldiers advising somebody in some small country somewhere. But
yeah.
So my the follow-on question to that is, how many countries do you think we should have troops in?
Yeah. So let me just bring it back to what we've been doing since 9/11. We've spent over $6 trillion on war since 9/11. Much of that has not been able to be proven as giving us significant national security returns. A lot of that money could have gone to infrastructure, health, education, you name it, things that make lives better. And if you we talk about a defense budget that's 3 to 4%. Many countries consider their defense budget, we're talking about NATO, you must get to 2%. Many countries, when they talk to you about their defense budget, it's their homeland security budget and their military budget, and some of them even include their veterans care as well. We have 3 separate budgets for that, and you're talking about just DoD is over 50% of discretionary spending. If you want to put in the national security aspects of the State Department, Department of Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs, you're talking a huge national security budget. We need to invest in diplomacy. It's a lot cheaper to invest in diplomacy and diplomats than bullets. Now, we still have, there are some, I believe that there are still some very strategic and critical alliances, but we shouldn't be spending $4 billion a month in Afghanistan. I mean, $4 billion a month is an insane number to be spending.
Okay, but let me ask you to name one country you think we should have troops in and explain why.
Sure. So I still think we need countries. I'm sorry. I still think that we benefit from our security relationships we have countries in
just one country. Name
Japan.
One. Okay.
Japan. We have a U.S.-Japan military alliance. I was in Japan recently working on issues related to that. That is one where Japan shares a lot of the costs.
Do you speak Japanese at all?
I do not. I speak Hebrew.
I lived in Japan, so. Okay.
But you did?
Yes, I lived in Hiroshima.
So you speak Japanese as well? As well. Okay, awesome. So I was in Nagasaki. I didn't make it to Hiroshima. Right. But that's an alliance that it doesn't just assist with our broader national security perspectives, but we work together on natural disaster response, diplomatic initiatives. Again, they share a lot of the cost-sharing agreement.
A lot of Japanese people don't want U.S. troops in their country anymore, especially in Okinawa.
Especially in Okinawa and that indigenous populous area. Definitely, a lot of these things need to be looked into. We shouldn't.
But here's the thing. Okay, we have troops. We could have foreign policy staff in Japan to do foreign policy things. We could have aid workers in Japan. Not that Japan needs our aid. We could have diplomats in Japan. But soldiers are men with guns and weapons and bombs. And my opinion, we don't need... Japan is the second or third largest economy in the world. They're an island nation, very hard to attack. They don't need our help. They can take care of themselves. What are we there for?
Yeah, so... Again, with Afghanistan, I think we need to get out right away. We've been there for a long, long time, and we're wasting our resources. In a country like Japan, we get a lot out of it. There's definitely corrections that need to be made.
What do we get out of it?
What do we get out
of spending $50 billion or $100 billion a year maintaining a large military in Japan? That's one of our largest. That's one of our largest places where we have troops.
So the number is a lot less, and being able to maneuver across the Pacific, so they're on the other side of the Pacific, having that strategic ability to, our forces in there deal with everything. It's narcotics, it's fishing, it's the weather systems, it's missile defense. We do everything in conjunction with Japan in the entire Pacific region.
Well, why don't we just defend our own borders?
Yep.
Why don't we just defend our own country and stop defending the rest of the world? I mean, look.
So again,
you talked about our budget,
yep.
and you kind of pinned the Republicans on the big military, even though the Democrats are in on it. So I'm saying let's have troops in one country, the United States, and I would even argue 0, and let the militia defend the United States since there's no actual threat to the United States. Yep. I know I'm extreme. I know I'm extreme on this, but I don't hear much of a reason why we need to be in Japan other than vagueness.
So no, I mean it's not vagueness. I'm not. My entire view is that we need to. Not my entire view. I definitely agree. We need to reduce how we use the military. We don't need to sit around and guard every single aspect of the world and make sure that. And this kind of goes back into the localized economy. If we had a more local economy, if we had something where we weren't reliant on protecting trade routes to the same extent, reduction of forces from a federal government perspective would be a much a different conversation. If we weren't reliant on fossil fuels, it would be a much different conversation. I do think we need a reduction. Am I ready to say remove every force out of every single country right now and without pushing our government in that direction? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we do need a reduction. Absolutely.
Well, let me phrase it a different way. We've had troops in Germany and Japan since 1945. That, if I'm not mistaken, is 75 years.
Yep.
What's our exit strategy?
I mean, a lot of it deals with the national security environment that we're in. There are some countries that have been wanting American support and assistance.
I don't care what they want. I'm asking,
yep.
When will the American people get to have their troops come home and stop wasting money in these countries? 75 years is an awfully long time for us to occupy Germany and Japan.
Like I was saying, I think a lot of this needs to go back down to reform. And what are our threats at the time? So one, campaign finance reform. When I was in Washington, D.C., I saw military companies push members of Congress to have the Navy buy aircraft carriers it didn't want.
Yes.
That, to me, is terrible. And Lois Frankel, by the way, was one of those who took the military money and bought an aircraft carrier that the Navy didn't even want.
I just want to be clear, by the way, I'm arguing with you. I want you to know I'm already endorsing you in the primary. I like arguing with people that I agree with more than I like arguing with people I don't agree with. So,
thank you for that. So I really appreciate it. We have military companies that pay for things push our government to buy things and be engaged in operations or encourage that type of engagement. You have military companies that pay for think tanks that put out ideology that might be saying we need to focus on this region because it's a national security concern, and they build national security dilemmas out of influencing public opinion and wielding their weight on Congress. I agree with that. Right now, I think we're still in situations where you do have nuclear countries that have shown hostility towards the United States. I want a reduction in forces. I want a reduction in the DoD's imprint. It's not something that I'm saying we shouldn't do. Our discretionary budget shouldn't be over 50% DoD. No way. It's insanity, and especially thinking about opportunity costs. It's truly a sad thing to see. But you know, I do want to push towards that. But again, just if the goal is to kind of get to a kind of like a quick statement of we need to exit this country, I'm one of these people that likes to plan and look at things from a much long-term perspective. But I want to make sure that we get to any more questions. I do apologize. Since it's getting close to 5:15, I'm going to have to.
Okay, well, really quick.
Yeah,
I was going to.
If you want to talk about the local election, I'd love to kind of touch on that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What matters to people? What do you think matters to people in Palm Beach County? What are the local things that Congress can do to make their lives better?
So, one, in Palm Beach County, you have, and I've seen this as my experience for the last few years in Congress, and then being back here campaigning in my hometown, you have a lot of people who don't know who their member of Congress even is. And that's a bad thing. That's not, and you might have people, they have bad civics, class. I don't think that's the case at all. When I worked for Tulsi Gabbard, she was in her community. She would go home from D.C., fly from D.C. for the weekend to Honolulu, spend 12 hours, fly to 3 different islands in Hawaii, spend 12 hours a day doing community workshops, engaging with the community, every single person, no matter who they were or where they were from or their party, and teaching community about Congress, about resources, various other types of workshops, and also community service. That's something that we need here. We don't have a lot of politicians that do here. So let me go to one of them. Environment. We live between the Everglades and the Atlantic Ocean. We have climate change. I don't know your views on that, but I'm a firm believer that we need to combat climate change. We have politicians here on every single level, including Frankel, who's probably taken $100,000 of sugar money. You know, you take money from sugar like that, and when there's nitrates killing our coral reefs, or when you've got burning that's affecting asthma, and you're the politician who's taking $100,000 over the past few years, you're not saying anything. Our community wants somebody who's going to stand up for them. When you have somebody like Lois Frankel, who took pharma money forever and continues to take pharma money, big pharmaceutical money, and when we have a $110 pill that is $6 in another country and it's the same pill, and it takes her 6 to 8 years to even start talking about the idea of a universal healthcare system, I think it's problematic. I think our district, I'm trying to raise awareness to these issues and how the system works and how pay to play works. And I'll just say one more thing. Frankel, from her times as the mayor of West Palm Beach, had a grand jury of the state of Florida say that administration is a pay to play administration. I'm trying to bring an honest representative to our community.
Okay, so I think you've got to go. I would just invite you, if you ever want to come back on again, we can do it directly to I wouldn't do the self-driving car thing again, but if you wanted to come on again and talk to the people of West Polk, I'd be happy to have you on again. Thank you very much for coming on with me.
Thank you so much, Warren. It's great to speak with you.
Have a good day.